Hello, CSU Horn Studio. Welcome to Horn Class number 2. Today we're going to talk about some of the basic elements of playing the horn: hand position, posture, breathing, buzzing, and articulation. There are going to be a lot of interactive opportunities for you today in the first part of Horn Class, so definitely have your mouthpiece and your horn out and ready. I want to mention that with these playing fundamentals we're about to discuss, you may have learned an approach from John or another teacher that you like better, and that's just fine. These are things that have worked for me and other students over the years, so you're still welcome to give them a good try. It never hurts to know more than one problem-solving approach to a playing issue on the horn. So let's get started. We're going to begin with a discussion about hand position. This is the single most unique aspect of playing our instrument. We're the only orchestral instrument that faces backwards, and the only orchestral instrument where the musician actually inserts a part of their body into the horn. So as you can imagine, there are some things that can go wrong. Let's start with the shape you want to make with the hand itself. Start by holding your hand out like you're going to shake hands with someone. You may have to cast back in memory to remember what it's like to touch another person's hand, right? So when you're presenting your hand, I'm trying to get this in the video, it naturally falls into kind of a gentle cup shape with the fingers together and the thumb lined up on top of the index finger. This is a perfectly relaxed hand position, but it also creates this weight-bearing tripod between your thumb and first finger that serve as a great platform to accept the weight of your horn. You don't want the weight of your horn to rest in your valve hand. That hand should be free for doing all the hard work. So make sure your fingertips are always touching the far side of the bell. One bad habit we can develop sometimes that adversely affects our pitch and tone is to accidentally let our fingertips start to drift into the middle of the bell throat. So keep them together and back against the far side of the bell. If you pick up your horn like you're going to play, then while in this position, imagine your bell is the face of a clock. So 12 o'clock would be right at the top. That's where I want my 3-knuckle tripod to go, right at 12 o'clock. The rest of your hand ends up between 12 and 2 on the clock face. So now I can go from playing seated to playing standing very easily because I already have my hand arranged to carry the weight of the horn. A word of caution: if your hand position starts to accidentally rotate around to be more to the left of 12 o'clock, there may be some eventual health hazards involved. First, you may end up setting your horn's weight down on the knuckle of your first finger in such a way that it's actually sitting on a slightly exposed nerve. This could be an issue in your bottom thumb joint as well if you veer too much to the right inside your bell. The other issue with drifting this far left is that there are muscles in your forearm that connect here that can get really tight and irritated if they're mistreated, whether that's from being engaged for too long or being engaged in position that isn't quite ergonomic, or from the weight of the horn. I'm not exactly sure. But if you're careful to keep your lower arm bones stacked one on top of the other, then those muscles are going to be a lot happier in the long run. And for me, keeping that knuckle tripod right at 12 o'clock is the trick that keeps my arm bones lined up this way. Another ergonomics issue you may run into that could affect those muscles is bending the wrist the wrong way. In an ideal hand position, you want to have your fingers together on the far side of the bell between 12 and 2, so then open your palm so that it's not obstructing any emerging sound waves. That means that your wrist will be slightly curved outward. Sorry, I'm going to put it down here where you can see it. And your arm will have this overall shape. But I've seen horn players, young horn players, who naturally fall into this position in the bell, which means that not only will your palm be in the way of the sound column, but you're also likely to start experiencing pain in your right forearm or even your elbow eventually. If you're interested in my opinions in the on the leg, off the leg debate in horn playing, I say do what works best for you as an individual. A great way to decide what works best for you is to consider how the instrument fits your body. My torso just so happens to be the right height, by which I mean short, that when I put the horn belt on my leg to play sitting down, it fits me perfectly if I'm sitting with my best posture. That means that instead of having to lean down or up or out to reach my mouthpiece, it comes organically to me. However, all horn players have to know how to play bell off leg because we do it whenever we play a solo. So if you're a bell on the leg player like myself, it doesn't hurt to practice standing up and to practice with your bell off the leg while sitting from time to time. I like to say that French horn hand position is a three-dimensional object. We just figured out where our hand works best in the round of the bell, but there's still another dimension to consider. That component is how far your hand should go into the bell. Again, this is an issue that no other instrument has to address. So I have a great trick for that. I can't remember who I learned this from, unfortunately. I wish I could give them credit because it's such a great trick. This is definitely interactive, so after I explain and demonstrate, I'll tell you when to pause the video so that you can experiment with this really cool trick on your own. So I'm going to play a treble clef third space C, or a C in the staff. Go ahead and use your trigger like you normally would. And I'm going to start way outside the bell with my hand. So that means that your horn is going to sound really sharp because when our hand is too far out of the bell, our pitch goes up. So I'm going to play that C, and starting with my hand way outside the bell, I'll very slowly move it into position while playing. There's something very specific that you're going to listen for as you do this exercise. The people who build our horns know that we're going to put our hands in the bell, duh, right? So the way that the horn bell is constructed, there are, as I understand it, particular places in the bell where the vibrations or sound waves will line up and create nodes. So there's going to be a spot inside your bell which is the perfect place for your hand to assist the lining up of those sound waves and the projection of more overtones, giving you a richer overall tone. And you can hear this with your own ears. It's an actual sonic phenomenon. I'll do this exercise for you twice. Both times I'll start way outside the bell. The first time I'm going to move slowly into my best hand position, but then move beyond that and flatten the pitch. So I'm going to go too far, almost like I'm playing stopped horn. So you should hear a pocket of tone in the middle. That is the place the horn wants my hand to be. The second time, I'll start outside the bell again. I'll slowly move right into the sweet spot based on where I hear that rich tone, and this time I'm going to stay there. After you do the second step, take a quick glance at where your hand is in the bell so you can kind of mark roughly where it should be. It may feel a lot different from where your hand was before, but if your tone is great and if it makes your notes slot better, it is so worth it. So here's the first time. So I hope you heard that middle section there that was the best sound. And this time I'm going to do that same thing starting way outside, but I'm going to stop at that best tone. I'm not going to go past it this time. So I'm sure you're ready to give this a go. Remember to go beyond the best sounding spot first so that you can really hear those overtones lock in. Then start from outside the bell a second time and slowly move into your best hand position by listening for your best tone. Go ahead and pause the video and give it a shot. A few more things. It's good to find your hand position this way before you tune your instrument, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. Also, your hand position is not only a 3D object, it's also a living object. Maybe the seasons and the temperature change, or maybe you're playing surfaces outside. Hot metal expands and hot brass instruments blow sharp. Well, your hand position can help you accommodate even in the moment. If you need to lower the pitch, you cup your palm or move your whole hand in slightly. If you're flat already, maybe you're playing Christmas carols around a Salvation Army kettle in freezing temperatures in downtown Chicago, like Adam and I used to do for seasonal work. And then in that case, if you're already flat, then of course you can push in your slides to make your instrument shorter so it plays higher. Or if you don't have time to adjust your slide, you can just open your palm or move your hand a little bit out, and that will help you raise the pitch. Hand position is also great for helping out in extreme registers. The horn is not a perfect machine, and if you try to use the same playing techniques in all registers, there are shortcomings built into the design of our instrument that will make that kind of homogeneous approach difficult to pull off. If we leave our hand position in the same place in the large middle section of our range where most of our playing is done, then our high register wants to be sharp if we keep our hand there up high. And if we keep our hand there when we go down low, our low register wants to go flat. Also, those notes won't slot as well, they won't ring as well. It's just part of the acoustics of our instrument. So what helps? Well, in the high register, you can either cup your hand a little bit more, or move it in a teeny bit, or a combination of the two. It doesn't take much movement up there, but you may notice through doing this that your high notes have better pitch, by which I mean lower pitch, and that they slot better too, meaning fewer blips. In the low register, it helps to open your hand or pull it out a bit. Though a slight adjustment in the high register will make a big difference, you can move your hand quite a bit in the low register before it makes a noticeable difference. I even know players that take their hand entirely out of the bell for low pedal notes. If I want to take my hand out that much, I tend to prefer the tone I get from pulling it down and resting it on the bottom of the bell so it doesn't sound quite as bright as having your hand all the way out. But in certain circumstances, that brightness may be exactly what you want. Also, make it a habit to check out your hand position every once in a while. Maybe you have it stuck in your head, like happens to me sometimes, that the last time you checked your hand position, it was too far out. So every time you sit down to play, you think about adjusting until eventually you've overcompensated and you're playing flat, or vice versa. Well, now you have a way to check that out to make sure that you're still in the ballpark tone-wise, and then in a few weeks we'll talk about tuning our instrument to match that tone. I thought about teaching hand position to students, and this thought should carry over to all of your future activities as a teacher. I'm going to tell you what I've told every future teacher I've ever taught, and this is my personal policy as well. Never touch a student. Just don't do it. Use your words or demonstrate using your own body, but do not touch the student to adjust them. I used to tell future teachers to ask if they could adjust hand position, but now I think it's more important that teachers not touch their students at all. Just because you think something is harmless doesn't mean that it's accepted that way. So keep a professional distance between you and your students, and start learning how to describe things using words or yourself miming the technique. Posture is a very important topic for instrumentalists. I've asked Adam to help us out today. Say hi to the CSU Horn Studio, Adam. For us wind instrumentalists, posture is discussed mostly from a viewpoint of facilitating efficient breathing, but it's also important that we think about posture in terms of our body health. Any repetitive action that's undertaken for hours a day for decades should be constantly re-examined to make sure that you're doing it in the most natural and least harmful way for your body. Otherwise, you risk injury, chronic pain, and maybe not even being able to play because of injuries that making music has caused you physically. So we want to learn what we can to take preventative measures to avoid that. We'll talk about some therapies later on that are devoted to connecting a person to their body's most ergonomic postures and movements. But for now, let's just cover some basics. In my job at UNR, I had a lot of students who loved marching band and played in summer drum corps, which is fantastic, and I was really proud of them. But there are 3 things I've heard through the grapevine that students are taught in maybe their high school marching band or maybe by well-meaning drum corps instructors that are counterproductive for playing the horn, and 2 of those things relate to posture. The first misconception is that your spine should be straight. That's only true if you're looking at someone head on, right? We don't want to lean from side to side. But actually, if you look at our spine from a sideways view, you see that it is not a straight line. It's actually shaped like a stretched out spring. Starting from the top of your head, you see that the weight of the back of the skull is counterbalanced with the cervical spine, or your neck. That curves inward. Then below, your shoulders and your spine curve back out to make room for your lung and heart cavity. Then it curves back in again in your mid and lower spine. The sacrum, which is on the back of your pelvis and made up of fused spinal cord bones, curves out once more. And then lastly, your coccyx or your tailbone curves in again. Not only is our spine shaped like a spring, but we also have cushions of cartilage between all our vertebrae. So that should tell you something about the function and the design of the spine. So why is this important? Well, when you're told to stand rod straight, sometimes people will overextend their upper back and neck. Not only does that put tension in your neck, which we definitely want to avoid, but it also constricts your windpipe slightly. The other posture advice that is sometimes given in a marching band context is to raise your chin so that the front part of your head is the highest point. This also distorts your windpipe. I'll briefly introduce you to Alexander technique later in the semester. Frederick Alexander was an actor who lost his voice and realized that it was related to a tendency to tighten his entire body when on stage. He developed techniques to help him release tension in performance, and those techniques are still taught today as Alexander technique. When I took an Alexander class in college, we were told that the specific way that he lost his voice was this very issue I'm discussing, an overextension of the head and neck up and back. Even just demonstrating that for you and seeing Adam demonstrate it, I can feel these neck muscles and see his neck muscles tense uncomfortably. So I like to think about the highest point on my head being the crown. The crown of your head is kind of in the back. Maybe Adam can show us. It's where sometimes you'll see like little boys with new haircuts and they have like a cute little swirl cowlick right there. So that's the crown of your head. So do as Adam is doing. Put one hand on the crown of your head. Maybe switch. And the other hand on your chin. Tilt your head until the hand on top feels like the highest point on your body, and I'm sure you saw that change for Adam. So what did you feel when you did that? What did your neck do? Maybe you felt it kind of elongate a little bit in the back. This is really good because instead of putting a kink in your windpipe, you're actually straightening it out slightly. So do that one more time for me, Adam, and let's note where his chin ends up. Think about where was it pointing when he started, and how about after he adjusted? As for the spine, I think what those well-meaning band directors and corps instructors actually want to focus on is the upper mid-back. This is a really interesting place in your spine. What we tend to do at this juncture of the spine is to not maintain the kind of upward slope shape that you see in pictures, where it kind of curves back out to our rear. Instead, you might see that you slump forward, and this causes all kinds of chaos. So you can see Adam's shoulders round forward and in, which stretches his back muscles. If he turns around and his back faces us, you can see his trapezius, which is a big triangle-shaped muscle across his back, and it runs over his shoulders. You can see how that's going to be distorted. And his rhomboids, which run diagonally between his spine down to his shoulder blades, which are also going to be really stretched out and very uncomfortable, not in their correct places at all. So this can cause really bad muscle knots and upper back pain, which is a bad problem for horn players anyway. If you sit with a rounded back like this, your lower back pushes out when it should be slightly rounded. Maybe, Adam, you could turn sideways for us and see that we don't have that nice, inward part of the spring there anymore. So as a thought, when you're standing, even though your lower back rounds in naturally, and maybe you could show us your good posture again, With your good posture, your lower back rounds in naturally, but you still want to tilt your pelvis this way for best posture to protect your lower back. And that's especially important when you're standing to play. So if you're doing a recital or playing your jury or something like that, you're trying to practice with your best, most comfortable posture, that's a big help, a big help. So let's try some things seated, Adam. So when you're sitting, if your back is rounded, then instead of putting the weight of your body on your sit bones, which is where, we need to readjust a little bit. Let's just tilt this down so you can see him. Yeah, so, normally you'd want your body weight to rest on your sit bones, which is actually a part of your pelvis. They're these little kind of half circles that dip down on the bottom of your pelvis. But if you round your lower back, you end up putting your weight on your tailbone, which is really weak and not equipped to handle that. I mean, you can break a tailbone really easily, probably not from sitting on it, but it just doesn't have a lot of structure in that joint. Even worse for us horn players, that forward slump squishes our lungs and all of the abdominal organs below our lungs that would move out of the way so we could get a good deep breath. So try to take a good breath for us, Adam. And for a tuba player, that's not very much. So for me, the remedy to all of these issues is just to think about keeping that upward slope in the upper middle part of my back, and that corrects my posture right away. Now take a breath for us, Adam. All right, and you can actually see his torso kind of open and close like a bellows. So Adam, I'm going to have you stand up for us again. Now, here's a good way to tell if your posture is in good shape. So stand with Adam, and you're going to stand in what feels to you like balanced posture. And just let your arms fall to your side. Now, if your body is properly balanced or stacked on top of itself, then the palms of your hands will face inward toward each other. And so you can see that's worked out for Adam really well. And if he's letting that slump or forward bend happen, however, when he does that same exercise, you can see that now his thumbs are pointed toward each other, not his palms. So this is a quick way to check your posture throughout the day, and it works just as well sitting down. So let's grab our chair again, and he'll show us that, and we'll take a look at a few other things. So he's sitting down, and with his great posture, yeah, if he drops his hands to his side, very good. And then how about bad posture? Yeah, now bring your hands up. You look like you're about to play piano, but maybe with not the best technique. So, when you're sitting down, you can also experiment with feeling what it's like to balance on your sit bones versus rolling back and improperly shifting your weight onto your tailbone. For this reason, I like to sit at the edge of my chair when I have the luxury of having enough space to do that. Although in certain circumstances, like you're in an opera pit, that's just not always possible. So your shoulders are interesting. They hang off your spine, and they're connected with a complex system of musculature. It's really weird when you look at images of the shoulder bones on a picture of the human skeleton without any muscles. They're just really not connected to any other bones in your rib cage or your spine in any way. Your shoulders are basically tied onto your torso with muscles. So as you can imagine, those must be some really strong muscles. If we hunch forward, as we talked about a minute ago, then in addition to those back issues we just mentioned, our pectoral muscles, which come across the front of our chest, can also constrict and tighten as we get older, adding to those hunched and rounded shoulders. There's just a room for a lot to go wrong in this area of the body. We're going to talk about some shoulder self-care down the road. In the meantime, here's a quick way to get your shoulders in the best position for your muscle and joint health. Squeeze your shoulders up to your ears, roll them back, and then roll them down. Great. So I'm going to have Adam stand up and turn around and do that for us. And we're going to take a look at what his shoulder blades do when we do that little exercise. So actually start in your hunched position. And he's going to move his shoulders up toward his ears, squeeze them up, roll them back, and then bring him down. And what you would see, if you could see his skeleton right now, you would see that now his scapula, his shoulder blades, are pointing down his back. So they're lined up together, parallel, pointing down his back. And his front is really extended, his pectoral muscles are stretched, so lots of good room for his lungs to expand and get a great breath. I'm sure you've all gotten really fantastic advice on breathing from other horn teachers or wind players in the past. I'm just going to cover a few basics and do one exercise with you. Now we can discuss the third misconception that I've heard from students passed along to me from marching instructors. And that misconception is the idea that your abdomen should stay tense or firm when you're inhaling. I've even known one horn player who was taught at drum corps camp that your stomach should go in when you inhale. Maybe this is for something that's encouraged for optics, but that advice is the exact opposite of how the mechanics of breathing actually work. When your lungs fill with air, your diaphragm, which is an involuntary muscle that you can't consciously move between your lungs and your guts, goes down and flattens out, and that pushes all of your guts down. All your clean organs, your heart and your lungs and your brain, are above the diaphragm, and then below, everything's mostly related to digestion. So because these organs are being squished down to make room for the lungs to expand, your stomach should instead puff out like you have a stomach full of spaghetti. Posture is so important for breathing. We talked about maintaining that upward slope in your upper middle back. If we hunch at that juncture in the spine, not only is it harder to breathe deep enough to push down the abdominal organs, but also the ribs are limited in how they can respond to a deep breath. Our sternum, or your breastbone, is connected to your upper ribs with cartilage. So this allows for some expansion of the ribs when we breathe. If we maintain that upward slope in our upper middle back, that allows for even further expansion of our rib cage, allowing us to take an even heartier breath. Your lungs look kind of like ocean coral on the Great Barrier Reef. There are some big main tubes like the trunk of a tree. Those split off into smaller branches, which split off into even smaller branches, each of which ends in a cluster of little air sacs. Those air sacs have a permeable membrane through which oxygen in your lungs can transfer into the bloodstream to be transported elsewhere in the body. And they also accept those blood cells also accept the carbon dioxide waste material that will be exhaled through the lungs. Occasionally, you'll hear wind players talk about exercises to expand your lung capacity, which is technically impossible once you're a grown adult. Though you may be able to become a more efficient breather and are better able to use the lung capacity that you have, the little sacs in your lungs will only hold so much air. They're not going to grow any larger, and you're not going to grow any more of those little sacs. So if your lung capacity is the same as like a 2-liter Coke bottle, I'm not saying that that's a reasonable amount, just as an example, then you're not going to be able to fit 2.5 liters of air into that Coke bottle, no matter how much you try. My husband, the tuba player, and nobody talks about breathing more than tuba players, has a great analogy for the ideal kind of breath wind players need to play our instruments. He calls it a vacuum breath. For this exercise, we're going to put our hand vertically in front of our mouth. The reason for this is just for demonstration purposes. If you take a deep breath, open mouth without your hand present, you should hardly hear any sound. So we're putting our hand in front of our mouth just so we can hear the pitch of the inhale, which will tell us something about the quality of that inhale. So to practice our vacuum breath, there are 2 tips to keep in mind. Number 1, breathe tall. So instead of breathing in a smile, you want to breathe vertically. You can hear the difference in pitch between these 2 breaths. Tip number 2, keep your tongue low. If your tongue floats up in your mouth while inhaling, it'll get in the way of achieving a full breath. So that's another issue that can cause a kind of high-pitched breath. Now let's do an experiment to find your 100% lung capacity. We don't need or want to breathe with 100% of our lung capacity to play the horn. We're just doing a little test so that you can see how much lung capacity you actually have. For this experiment, we're going to divide the lungs into 3 imaginary zones. We'll imagine that we're breathing into the bottom of the lungs, the middle of the lungs, and then the top of the lungs. So for your first breath, exhale to begin. Keep your tongue low, breathe tall, and take a deep, quick breath into the bottom of your lungs. As soon as you get the full breath, turn your air directly around and exhale it all out. It's going to look and sound like this. Hear that nice, open, low-pitched sound? So let's do that together. And once more, exhale to begin. So if you start to feel a little lightheaded while we're doing this exercise, be sure to pause your video and just sit for a second before you continue. It happens to all of us. Now we're going to take that same low breath and add a middle breath on top of it, then exhale right away. It'll look and sound like this. Do you hear the pitch difference between the 2 breaths? Let's do that together. And once more, let's exhale to begin. Those 2 breaths together probably make up between 85 to 90% of your total lung capacity. So since we're out to discover what 100% of your lung capacity feels like, let's take that low and middle breath and we're going to add just one more little sip breath at the top. Now this may feel a little uncomfortable, so be sure to exhale right away as soon as we get the 3rd breath. It's going to look and sound like this. Let's do that together. All right, one more time. Exhale to begin. So what did you feel upon taking that 3rd breath? For me, I feel like my lungs are overfull. In the first 2 breaths, I feel an expansion of my rib cage, but with that 3rd breath, sometimes I feel an expansion in my lower back or up in my shoulders or my neck, and occasionally my back will crack when I do that 3rd breath. So I can tell that my lungs really are extra full, way more than they need to be. Now, as I said, this 100% breath is just for curiosity and demonstration purposes. You would never want to play on a breath this full. The breath that we really want to play on is that 85 to 90% breath that combines step 1, the low breath, and step 2, the medium breath. If you practice great posture and get really efficient with your inhale, then you can definitely get closer to that true 85-90% breath than if your posture or your suffers, or if your inhale has your lips or your tongue in the way, right? A smile or a high tongue. So let's go back to that 2-step breath, low then medium. We'll do that together 3 times. Let's exhale to begin. Breathe out. Take a minute and rest so you don't get lightheaded. This time at the end, let's exhale in the shape of our embouchure. So exhale to begin. Ready? Take a minute. Now, on this last time, let's get rid of that hitch between the low and the medium breath so it's just one smooth breath in. Exhale in your embouchure, and let's see how long we can drag out that exhale. And hopefully that last breath felt nice and relaxed and open. Let's touch a little bit on healthy buzzing practices. I'm going to introduce you to my mouthpiece exercises next week. So here are a few thoughts on creating a productive buzz. The first thought is about what shape an embouchure should take. Should we be kind of telescoped in, like we're pursing our lips? Or more spread out like a smile? Well, according to well-known hornist and teacher Eli Epstein, who played in Cleveland, teaches in Boston, and wrote the fantastic book Horn Playing from the Inside Out some years back that you're going to hear me reference from time to time, Mr. Epstein says that your lips should basically be in the middle of these two extremes, doing almost no work at all. He uses the syllable M, M, M. So you can see this is just pretty neutral. My lips are very neutral, not pursed forward. So try that. M, M. So I like to think of that syllable to help demonstrate the ideal shape and also how much effort should be put forth by your lips in forming an embouchure. I like that M syllable as well because it feels like the corners are tucked and the middle is loose, which is exactly what we want. They're not tight, they're just tucked against the teeth, and the middle is very free. In fact, the lips do very little activity in horn playing. Their primary function is to just get in the way of the airstream so that the airflow causes the flesh to vibrate. So any muscling of the lips will necessarily make it harder for them to vibrate freely because we would be adding tension or even making the lips too tight to vibrate properly. I have an exercise for building a healthy, relaxed embouchure that I learned from a trumpet teacher in Alabama when I was 14 or 15 years old. You'll need your mouthpiece for this. I've heard it recommended that you hold your mouthpiece in your non-dominant hand or hold it between just your thumb and first finger. Both of these suggestions are helpful if you feel like you use a lot of mouthpiece pressure and you want to, especially during your buzzing, practice using less. So we're going to start with a mouthpiece simply just held up to our face. You're going to do our tall, low-pitched inhale, then exhale, just leaving your lips just as relaxed as they were for the breath in. The air is going to escape all around the mouthpiece, not just through it. Keep your tongue low on the inhale. It's going to look and sound like this. So I'm really not doing anything at all. And I'll show you one more time on the side. I'll count us in. Breathe in on 4 and out on 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to take the same inhale, but on the exhale, you're just going to bring the corners of your mouth just a little bit closer to the middle. The air from that exhale is still going to go out the corners and around the sides of the mouthpiece. So bringing your corners in might feel a little like a pucker, but none of this action is in your lips, right? They're totally floppy. So it's just a slight movement in, and you don't engage the muscles of the lips at all when you do this. So let's do this step of the exercise. It's going to look and sound like this. Let me do it this way, if you can see. Okay, let's do that together. Breathe in on 4, 2, 3. This time we'll do the same inhale, but on the exhale, bring your corners in enough that the holes on each side of your mouthpiece are finally sealed. But your lips should still be unengaged enough inside the mouthpiece that you don't produce a buzz when the air goes through it. So that's going to look and sound like this. And together with me, 2, 3. Then on our last step, we're just going to bring our corners in just a millimeter more so that the air flowing through your lips creates a buzz all on its own. We're not making the buzz. The buzz is happening because the flesh is in the way, and the airstream causes the flesh to vibrate because it's an obstruction. We don't cause the flesh to vibrate. It's a reaction to our airstream. So what better way to get a good productive vibration than to have a nice, relaxed, organic approach to your buzz? Also on this step, ask yourself, what part of your lip is actually buzzing? So here's what this is going to look and sound like. It's okay if it comes in and out. We're just trying for the easiest buzz possible. So together now, we're going to breathe in on 1, 2, 3. So what part of your lip do you think was buzzing? For me, it's kind of the inside of the lip, the part that has mucous membranes, not the part like you would wear lipstick on. We're kind of like right here. And that makes sense because if you look at, say, the Phil Farkas pictures of famous horn players' embouchures, you'll see that the opening that our air comes through, the aperture, like a camera lens, is right there where the outside of the lips meets the inside of the mouth. I like to start practice sessions sometimes by doing this embouchure building exercise. It reminds me to approach buzzing by only using the effort that's absolutely needed and by trying to simplify out any extra effort that might be trying to sneak in. So let's talk about the role of the tongue in playing the horn. We know that it's responsible for articulation, but it's so much more than that. Sometimes if you ask, kids at an ed show how they think we change notes, well, they might say our valves, but they might think we're doing it with our lips. In response, I like to mention the opening trumpet solo in Mahler's Symphony No. 5. The principal trumpet starts all by him or herself. Da-da-da-dum, 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 da-da-da-dum. Now, if a musician tried to play that pretty rangy solo by using his or her corners to smile and purse his lips, then you would see this. You can watch every recording on YouTube. You will not see a trumpet player do that. So you're not actually likely to see their lips move very much at all. So we're not actually moving our lips enough to make that much of a difference between pitches over what, for the French horn at least, is a 3.5 to 4 octave range. However, there is something that moves very actively while we play. It's invisible to the eye when you're watching a brass player because it's inside our mouths, and that's your tongue. We're very lucky these days because with MRIs, we can see what is happening inside a brass player's head while they play. So in just a moment, I'd like for you to pause, go to YouTube, and watch a short video entitled MRI Chamber Music with Sarah Willis. Sarah Willis is a fantastic British hornist in the Berlin Philharmonic. She had an MRI done while buzzing different registers and techniques on her mouthpiece. It's better for you to watch than for me to describe it. But a few things that I will draw your attention to. What happens when she goes up high? And what about when she goes down low? So how are those tongue positions different? She tongues in different places when playing in those different registers too, so notice that as well. What about when she crescendos and diminuendos? And if you really want to be freaked out, stick around for the double tonguing. It's amazing, but it is super weird to watch like this. So now is a good time to pause and go take a look. So this video is pretty solid proof that we're using tongue positions to change notes, not our lips. Basically, the shape of the tongue changes the shape and size of the tube for air inside your mouth. If you're playing with a garden hose out back in your backyard and you're just letting the water run out freely, then all of the air will flow out right away. But if you want it to go faster, you put an obstruction in the way, your thumb. So now less air is getting through, or in that case, water. But that air or water is moving a lot faster. And our tongue works the same way as a kind of airflow regulator when we play the horn. When Sarah Willis played down low, her tongue was out of the way, allowing for a large volume of air to flow into her horn. But when she played up high, there was much less space in her mouth for airflow. From From the side, it looks like almost none, but when they show that front view where you're looking like down the middle of her tongue, you can see that her tongue has changed shape to make an even smaller tube for air to flow through, almost like a little straw. So I call this part of your tongue's role in playing the horn the quote, vowel shapes. Vowel shapes are responsible for what note or register you play in and for your tone. Consonant shapes are responsible for articulations. In thinking about articulation, I have a few different influences to share with you. The first is from Eli Epstein's book, Horn Playing from the Inside Out. I loaded this document into our folder so you can keep a copy for yourself if you'd like. Eli Epstein undertook a kind of a scientific study to figure out what his tongue should be doing to produce the best sounding notes in each register. And this is a guide to the system he developed. First, notice the vowel sounds that he assigns to each register. Mr. Epstein says that in the register between middle C and third space C on the treble clef staff, you have the most vowel changes in that octave. You can try this out yourself by slurring through the open harmonics on the F horn in this register. So with no trigger, you're going to play C, E, G, kind of a flat B and C. Feels like every notch needs a new tongue position to make it slot up to that note. Mr. Epstein says the highest pitches actually like the vowel sound I, as in necktie. And if you say tie and T back and forth, you can see that tie is a little further back in the mouth. So tie, T, tie, T, tie. It kind of makes the edge of your tongue stand like vertically straight up, right? In addition to finding his best vowel shape for each register on the horn, Mr. Epstein also talks about where he gets the cleanest articulation in each register. In the high register, he uses the edge, this kind of edge, of his tongue, and it touches on the backside of the alveolar ridge, which is that bumpy, hard ridges of skin right before the smooth dome, hard palate. And that's where he says tie, tie, tie. And let's look at the middle articulation, which applies from B to D sharp. For this articulation, Mr. Epstein says that the proper register for articulating is where the tongue meets the teeth, which is, when I was growing up, this is where we were told to articulate everything. Now look at the very bottom articulation. I don't know that I use this exact articulation until I get a little lower in the register, maybe around middle C. I use a different source of advice for my low register, which I'll introduce you to next. One more note about this method. In my experience, when playing very softly, it has helped me to aim for one articulation behind where this chart says you should play for that particular register. So one articulation back when you're playing soft. The second influence I'd like to add into this articulation discussion is the advice of my teacher, Steve Proser, who's fourth horn in the Utah Symphony. I struggled with my low register for years and years until I studied with Steve. He patiently listened to me play terrible sounding low notes over and over for 3 years, and he very thoughtfully answered my dozens of questions about what was happening inside his mouth to make such great, dependable low sounds. Over the course of those 3 years, my low range improved drastically, and I learned a few things about what to do and what I was doing wrong before. I've had at least 2 different teachers say to me, "Well, you sound so lovely in the middle and high registers, just do in the low register what you're doing up there." So I would try and try and try to use the same motions I used in the high register to make low notes, and it really just got worse and worse. I mean, deteriorated. I started to jut out my bottom jaw, probably because that created more space in my mouth so that something like a low airstream shape was created, even if it was a mediocre one. But that created its own issues, and I started to get the beginnings of TMJ. I think the studying with Steve probably saved my career, because if I had continued to try to diligently keep forcing a low register by basically unhinging my jaw, I would have really broken myself, and it probably wouldn't have taken much longer. So, through asking Steve a bazillion questions, I started to understand that, of course, I couldn't create low notes by doing what I do in the middle and high registers. In fact, I needed to do basically the opposite. He had me start to articulate in the low register using the flat pad of my tongue, so not the edge, but kind of this part, touching the bottom of my teeth or even my top lip. Also, instead of the cute little roller coaster shape that you saw Sarah Willis's tongue make in the middle and high register, I had to adjust my tongue in the low register so that it flattened out and was further forward in my mouth. The extra piece of advice that I got out of Steve in my last year was about what happens after you articulate in the low register. Your tongue doesn't just sit there in your mouth like taking up space like this. For a great low tone after you articulate, so let's say this is my lip or the bottom of my top teeth, you're going to want to tuck that tip of your tongue down behind your teeth. I mean, that buzz just falls out of my lips when I do that. So grab your mouthpiece and let's do a couple of experiments. We're going to start a little higher up in the register. We're going to say tsu. So breathe in and then say tsu to release your buzz. Tsu. Do it one more time. Now say tie, tie. And then breathe in, release your buzz saying tie. Again. Good. This time we're going to say tho, T-H-O-H. Steve would say P-T-O-H, po. And have that bottom of my top teeth, upper lip meet with the pad of my tongue. Po, po. So we're going to breathe in and buzz and say po. So I'm wondering if the same thing happened for you as you heard happen for me. Just by assuming those vowel shapes and by articulating in a particular place, the notes automatically played in the register that I wanted. Now, we don't need to think about these things all the time when we play the horn. I'm teaching you about this for two reasons. Number one, so you actually understand what's physically taking place when you play your instrument. And number two, so that if you're having problems in a particular register, you have some knowledge that may help you troubleshoot it. But we don't go around, playing the horn thinking, oh, my tongue arches here and dips there and articulate this way with this kind of edge, all the time. Maybe if there's a special spot where we tend to chip and thinking that helps, then we can, indulge in those thoughts. But what we will do is make some of those conscious decisions in our practice session. Once you figure out what tricks you need to do to play that spot, the idea is to go beyond thinking about that physical technique. So let that part become rote, and then you can switch to thinking, how can I make this phrase more musically effective? Do I like the tone color here? Does it express what I want to say with this music? So these physical tips are all just in service of playing the music. You should try to always aim for that destination in your thought process by the time you step on stage to perform. To finish up our discussion of basic fundamentals of playing the horn, keep your mouthpiece out. We're going to walk through the whole process of starting a sound on the horn. First, you've got your 85% vacuum breath. Let's do it together. Breathe on 4, 2, 3. Next, as you go from inhale to exhale, your mouth is going to form an M embouchure, just sealing around your mouthpiece and just enough that a buzz wants to happen on its own. Let's breathe on 1, 2, 3. Your abdominal muscles help control the exhale. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to add an articulation. Pick the articulation and vowel sound you want. I'm going to aim for the low register, so I'll say po with the flat pad of my tongue on the bottom of my top teeth or even my top lip. For this step of the exercise, we're going to vacuum inhale, prep our M embouchure, then place your articulation and exhale against that articulation while keeping it in place. So we're not going to make a sound. We're just trying to check our seal. It's going to look and sound like this. Okay? So let's do this together. 2, 3. Okay. Everything all together now. Vacuum breath, M embouchure, good articulation. As we exhale, we're just gonna let the buzz happen on its own. We don't have to create the buzz. We just create the conditions that create a buzz. So we're gonna do this 3 times. So you can try different articulations and registers each time if you'd like. I'm gonna do the low register this time. 2, 3. Now I'm going to do the high register, tie, 2, 3. And now I'm going to do the middle register. Let's say 2, 2, 3. I want to end horn class today with a musical topic, phrasing. Phrasing is one of those words that I heard my band directors and music teachers say for a long time before I understood what it meant. For a while, I thought it was about dynamics, which it is in part. But phrasing is really about musical tension, where it's pressing forward to and where it releases from. We humans love tension and the relaxation of that tension. You can see this in most movies, but especially in romantic comedies. The couple meets and there's tension. Then they start to kind of like each other and some of that tension is backed off. Then there's some crazy like deus ex machina or crazy event that's beyond their control, gets in the way, and then the tension increases again. But what happens at the end? It's happily ever after, the ultimate trope of tension relief. So to talk about phrasing, we have to talk a little about the phrase itself, which is a formal structure in music. A phrase is a complete thought that ends with a cadence. A cadence is a series of chords that resolve the harmony and create a point of repose in the music. For an idea to be a cadence, it has to have that little pause on the chord that the phrase ends on. Most of that phrase is going to be responsible for driving tension forward. So what that means for you as a player is not backing off on the longer notes in the middle of the phrase, like half notes. Make sure you drive tension through those notes if they're in the middle of a phrase, and driving the energy all the way to the apex of the phrase. Just trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Bum, ba, bum, 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 bum. Right? The big question is, how do I know where the apex or the turning point of the phrase is? The apex, or the top of the phrase, is where the energy changes from a driving intensity to a relaxation. The answer is to think about the harmony in the music. To find that place of relaxation, we're looking for a chord that achieves resolution, or a kind of peace. That's where the energy turns from driving to repose. Now, in classical music, even a 5 chord can hold tension because it needs to be resolved. It can also be a kind of a point of resolution, like in a half cadence. In both cases, the phrase builds tension until it hits a point of harmony that releases that tension and introduces a moment of rest. This is where we get one of the strangest parts about phrasing. Based on the way dynamics are often drawn, I used to think that a phrase was equal parts tension and equal parts relaxation. But that's not really how harmony works. Instead, we usually have 80-85% tension in the phrase and just a short period of relaxation into the cadence. Or even directly on the cadence. So instead of this, a well-played phrase often looks more like this. Now, this is true in music on both a micro and a macro level. Often in a piece of music, you'll have much of the movement or work building toward one great apex, which may be found somewhere around 3/4 of the way through the piece or that movement, or even later on. And then what follows is a great settling of the unrest that led to that apex. So the phrasing of a larger work will often resemble the structure of tension and release in a single musical phrase. Here is your attendance assignment for this week. If you have Sean for lessons, you will have a different assignment than my students this week. So for Sean's students, I'd like for you to take a video of you doing the hand in the bell trick that we learned today. You can take the video from out front. It doesn't have to be from behind your bell. That's fine, although you can if you'd like. He just needs to be able to hear your hand move slowly into the bell. So you're going to do it 2 times. Start way outside the bell both times, and you're going to move it in very slowly. The first time, you're going to have it go through your best tone, and then you're going to close it. So when you go to past that best spot, the second time you're going to stop where you think the tone sounds the best. And then send your video to Sean so he can hear your best tone. Now for my students, we're going to do the first step of composing our etude. So we're going to choose our parameters today. You're just going to answer a list of questions for me. The first overarching question is, do you want to compose a tonal piece or a non-tonal piece? And now once you decide on that big topic, then there are a separate list of questions you'll answer depending on what you picked. So for a tonal piece, and maybe you want to stop the video in between while you think about these things, do you want to be in a traditional mode, a major or minor, or do you want to be in one of our Greek modes, which we talk about with scales? We talked about Greek modes. Or do you want to use a synthetic mode like Lydian, Mixolydian, 2 Greek modes put together? Or our symmetrical synthetic scales like a whole tone scale or an octatonic scale? Once we get into those, we're kind of veering away from tonality, but we can still assert a tonic. And so that brings us to our next question. If you're going to compose a tonal piece, you'll need to choose a tonic or choose a key signature. You're probably going to go up to a high point, that's the 3rd, the 5th, or the tonic. And the same thing with going down to a low point. So think about maybe what you want your high note or your low note to be. Now, if you want to choose an atonal piece, do you want complete freedom in how you choose your pitches, which is true atonality, or do you want to use some kind of pitch generating structure? And I can help you with this if you're somewhat familiar, if you've gone through like theory, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, you guys cover it. So for free composition, you can use pitch cells, and then for 12 tone, you'll want to compose a 12 tone row. Now, for everybody, do you want a time signature or do you want your composition to be unmetered? If you want a time signature, do you want a duple time or a triple time? So a 2/4 or 3/4. We can figure out your actual time signature later. Or do you want asymmetrical time signature like 5/4 or 7/8? Or do you want to alter your time signature frequently so that your piece is metered but not in a regular time? So kind of write down some ideas about how you'd like to compose. And then pick some playing techniques that you'd like to focus on in your piece. For example, dynamics, range, slurring, articulation, multiple articulation, big jumps, fast playing, breath control, scales, arpeggios, etc. Pick maybe 1 or 2 of those you really want to focus on. Then send me a list of your parameters for your attendance credit, and we'll talk them over in your next lesson. So I hope you enjoyed Horn Class 2, and I'll see you next week for Horn Class 3.